The howling wind rattled the windows of Marcus Thompson's delivery van as he navigated through the worst snowstorm Denver had seen in decades. What he didn't know was that his next delivery would change 3 lives forever, and that within 24 hours, a limousine would be waiting outside his modest apartment with news that would turn his world upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The digital clock on Marcus Thompson's dashboard glowed at 6:47 p.m. as he squinted through the swirling snow that had transformed the familiar streets of suburban Denver into an unrecognizable winter maze. At 26 years old, Marcus had been driving for quick cart delivery for almost 3 years, working double shifts to support his younger sister Emma through college. Tonight was supposed to be his last delivery of a grueling 14-hour day, but the storm had other plans. His beat-up Toyota van, which had seen better days even when he'd bought it 5 years ago, struggled against the mounting snowdrifts. The heater barely worked, and Marcus could see his breath forming small clouds as he checked the GPS on his cracked phone screen. The address showed 4821 Maple Grove Lane, tucked away in one of Denver's older neighborhoods, where the houses sat on generous lots surrounded by mature oak and pine trees. Marcus had always prided himself on completing every delivery, no matter the weather. Growing up in foster care had taught him the value of reliability and hard work. When other drivers called in sick or refused to work in bad weather, Marcus saw opportunity. The extra hours meant more money, and more money meant Emma could focus on her pre-med studies instead of worrying about textbooks and tuition. The van's tires spun momentarily as he turned onto Maple Grove Lane. The street was barely visible, under a blanket of snow that had to be at least 8 inches deep and still falling heavily. Most of the houses had warm lights glowing in their windows, creating a picture-perfect winter scene that would have been beautiful if Marcus wasn't fighting to keep his vehicle on the road. He passed house after house, counting down the numbers: 4817, 4819, and finally 4821. The house that came into view made him pause. It was a charming 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch, the kind of home that spoke of decades of family memories. But something was wrong. While neighboring houses showed signs of life with cleared driveways and porch lights, this house seemed almost abandoned to the storm. The driveway was completely impassable, buried under snow that reached nearly to Marcus's knees when he stepped out of the van. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing to suggest anyone had been outside in hours. The walkway to the front door was equally treacherous, and Marcus noticed that several newspapers were piling up near the mailbox, their plastic bags barely visible under the accumulating snow. Marcus grabbed the insulated delivery bag containing what his order sheet indicated was a prescription pickup from Henderson's pharmacy. The elderly customers had paid extra for priority delivery, noting in the special instructions that it was urgently needed medication. As he trudged through the deep snow, his work boots filling with the icy powder despite his best efforts, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The front porch was covered in a thick layer of undisturbed snow, and Marcus had to brush off the welcome mat just to find solid footing. As he approached the front door, he could hear something that made his heart sink. The sound of someone coughing violently from inside the house, followed by a weak voice calling out words he couldn't quite make out. Marcus knocked firmly on the door, the sound echoing in the snowy silence. "Delivery from Quick Cart," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the muffled quiet that only heavy snowfall can create. The coughing stopped, and after a long moment he heard shuffling footsteps approaching slowly. The door opened just a crack held by a security chain, and Marcus found himself looking at a woman who appeared to be in her late 70s. Her silver hair was disheveled, and her face was pale with worry. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice weak but filled with relief. I didn't think anyone would come in this weather. I'm Eleanor Whitman. Marcus Thompson, ma'am. I have a prescription for you. He held up the insulated bag. Are you all right? I couldn't help but hear coughing. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. It's my husband, Robert. He's been running a fever for 2 days, and his breathing... She trailed off, her hands shaking as she worked to unlatch the chain. I tried to get to the pharmacy myself, but I can't even get our car out of the garage. The snow is just too deep, and I'm not steady enough on my feet to walk in this. When Eleanor fully opened the door, Marcus could see into the warmly lit living room behind her. An elderly man, presumably Robert, was seated in a recliner near a fireplace, wrapped in several blankets. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the man's labored breathing and hear the concerning wheeze that accompanied each exhale. "Here's your medication, Mrs. Whitman," Marcus said, handing over the bag. "But I have to ask, have you been able to get food? I noticed your newspapers piling up, and with the roads being this bad..." Eleanor accepted the bag with hands that trembled slightly. "We've been managing what we had in the pantry, but we're running low. I was hoping the snow would stop so I could at least get to the corner market, but it just keeps coming down harder." Marcus glanced back at his van, then at the elderly couple's predicament. His shift was officially over, and he knew Emma was waiting for him to pick up dinner on his way home. But the thought of leaving these two vulnerable people stranded in a snowstorm didn't sit right with him. "Mrs. Whitman, when was the last time you two had a proper hot meal?" Eleanor's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Yesterday morning, I think. We've been mostly having crackers and whatever soup we had in the pantry. Robert hasn't been eating much because of his illness." Without hesitation, Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call my dispatch and see if I can make a grocery run for you folks. There's a 24-hour supermarket about 2 miles from here that should still be open." "Oh, we couldn't ask you to do that," Eleanor protested, but Marcus could hear the hope in her voice. "You've already done so much just getting our medicine here." "Ma'am, it's not a problem. I've got a 4-wheel drive van, and I know these roads pretty well. Besides, it doesn't feel right leaving you two without proper food, especially with Mr. Whitman being sick." As if on cue, another violent coughing fit erupted from the living room, followed by Robert's weak voice calling out, "Eleanor, is everything all right?" "It's fine, dear," Eleanor called back, but Marcus could see the worry etched deeply in the lines around her eyes. "The medicine is here." Marcus made his decision. "Mrs. Whitman, I'm going to make that grocery run. Can you give me a list of what you need? Basic stuff, soup, bread, milk, anything that would help Mr. Whitman get his strength back." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of gratitude rather than worry. "I don't know what to say. That's incredibly kind of you." "Just being a good neighbor," Marcus replied, though he knew that technically he lived clear across town in a much less affluent area. "Let me get some paper from my van, and you can write down what you need." As Marcus trudged back through the snow to his van, he thought about the contrast between his own small apartment and the Whitmans' beautiful home. Despite their obvious financial comfort, they were just as vulnerable as anyone else when faced with a crisis. The storm had been a great equalizer, reminding him that kindness and community mattered more than economic status. He returned with a small notebook and pen, stomping the snow off his boots before stepping onto the porch. Eleanor had put on a heavy coat and was waiting for him with a grateful smile that seemed to warm the cold evening air. "I feel terrible asking you to do this," she said as she began writing. "But Robert's medication needs to be taken with food, and we really are running quite low." "Please don't feel bad about it," Marcus assured her. "I've got nowhere else to be tonight, and the roads aren't getting any better. Might as well make the trip worthwhile." Eleanor handed him a modest list. Chicken soup, crackers, bread, milk, bananas, and a few other basic items. She also pressed a $50 bill into his hand. "This should cover everything, with extra for your trouble." Marcus tried to hand the money back. "The food won't cost nearly this much, Mrs. Whitman." "Keep it," she insisted. "You're going above and beyond what anyone would expect. The least we can do is compensate you for your time and gas." As Marcus prepared to leave for the grocery store, Eleanor caught his arm gently. "Marcus, you don't know what this means to us. Robert and I have lived in this house for 43 years, and we've always prided ourselves on being independent. This storm has shown us that sometimes we need to accept help, and I'm grateful it came from someone as kind as you." The sincerity in her voice touched something deep in Marcus's heart. He thought about his own grandparents who had passed away when he was in foster care, and wondered if they would have needed help like this in their final years. The thought that the Whitmans might have spent days without proper food or medication because of their pride and the storm's timing troubled him deeply. "I'll be back in about an hour," Marcus promised. "Try to keep Mr. Whitman warm and make sure he takes his medication as directed." The grocery store trip proved to be an adventure in itself. The supermarket was nearly empty, except for a few employees and several other people who, like Marcus, were braving the storm for necessities. He carefully selected items from Eleanor's list, adding a few extra things he thought might help: herbal tea that might soothe Robert's throat, some easy-to-digest crackers, and a container of homemade-style chicken soup from the deli counter that looked more substantial than the canned variety on Eleanor's list. The drive back to Maple Grove Lane was even more treacherous than before. The snow had intensified, and Marcus's van struggled through drifts that were now over a foot deep in places. But the thought of the elderly couple waiting for him and Robert's concerning cough kept him focused and determined. When he finally pulled back into the Whitmans' driveway, he was relieved to see that the lights were still on and smoke was still rising from the chimney. Eleanor must have been watching for him because she opened the door before he could knock, her face bright with relief and gratitude. "You made it back," she said, as if she had been genuinely worried about his safety. "Robert has been asking about you. I think he wants to thank you personally." Marcus carried the groceries into the warm house, immediately appreciating the contrast with the bitter cold outside. The living room was cozy and inviting, filled with family photos and the kind of comfortable furniture that spoke of a long, happy marriage. Robert was still in his recliner, but he appeared more alert than he had earlier. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Young man," Robert said, his voice hoarse but stronger than before, "Eleanor tells me you've gone well beyond the call of duty tonight. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it." As Marcus helped Eleanor put away the groceries in their well-organized kitchen, he learned more about the couple's situation. They had 3 children, all of whom lived in other states, and their usual support network of neighbors and friends had been disrupted by the storm. Eleanor explained that they had always been the ones helping others in the neighborhood, and accepting help felt foreign and uncomfortable to them. "We've always been givers, not takers," Eleanor said, as she prepared a cup of the herbal tea Marcus had selected. "Robert spent 35 years as a high school principal, and I was a nurse at Denver General for almost as long. We're used to taking care of other people." The revelation that Eleanor had been a nurse explained her calm competence in caring for Robert, but Marcus could also see the strain of the past few days in her tired eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. By the time Marcus prepared to leave for the second time that evening, Robert's color had improved slightly, and he had managed to eat some of the soup along with his medication. The couple's gratitude was evident, but Marcus felt as though he had received more than he had given. The warmth of their home, their genuine appreciation, and the reminder that small acts of kindness could make a profound difference had filled something in his own heart that he hadn't even realized was empty. As he bundled up to face the storm again, Eleanor pressed another $20 bill into his hand, despite his protests. "For Emma's college fund," she said with a knowing smile. "You mentioned her earlier, and any young man who works this hard to support his sister's education deserves all the help he can get." The fact that Eleanor had remembered his casual mention of Emma and had thought to contribute to her education touched Marcus more deeply than he could express. As he walked back to his van through the still falling snow, he reflected on how a routine delivery had become something much more meaningful, a reminder that genuine human connection could bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. The next morning brought a deceptive calm to Denver. The snowstorm had finally exhausted itself sometime around 3 a.m., leaving behind a crystalline world transformed by nearly 18 inches of pristine white powder. Marcus woke up in his small studio apartment to the unusual silence that only comes after a major snowfall, when the entire city seems to hold its breath. His phone showed 17 missed calls from Quick-Cart Dispatch and a text message that made him smile. All deliveries suspended until road crews clear main arteries. Stand by for updates. For the first time in months, Marcus had an unexpected day off, though the company's policy meant it would be unpaid. As he sipped his morning coffee and looked out at the snow-covered parking lot of his apartment complex, Marcus found his thoughts drifting back to Eleanor and Robert Whitman. Something about their situation nagged at him. The beautiful house, the obvious signs of a comfortable life, yet the vulnerability that had been so apparent during the storm. He wondered how they were managing this morning, whether Robert's condition had improved, and if they had everything. They needed, Emma called while he was getting dressed, her voice bright with the excitement that only a college sophomore could muster about an unexpected snow day. "Marcus, can you believe this storm? All my classes are cancelled, and the campus looks like a winter wonderland. How did your deliveries go yesterday?" Marcus found himself telling his sister about the Whitmans, though he downplayed the extent of his help. Emma had always worried that he worked too hard and gave too much of himself to others, sometimes at his own expense. But her response surprised him. "You know what, big brother? That's exactly the kind of person I want to be when I'm a doctor. Someone who sees a need and just steps up to help. Those people are lucky they got you instead of some other driver who might have just dropped off the prescription and left." After hanging up with Emma, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impulsive to anyone who didn't know him well. He drove to the same supermarket from the night before, this time to pick up ingredients for his grandmother's chicken and dumpling recipe. His foster mother, Mrs. Rodriguez, had taught him to cook when he was 16, insisting that self-sufficiency in the kitchen was as important as any other life skill. The chicken and dumplings had become his signature comfort food, and something told him the Whitmans might appreciate a homemade meal. The roads were treacherous but passable, with city plows having made at least one pass through the main streets. Marcus drove carefully, his van loaded with groceries and a large, slow cooker he had borrowed from his downstairs neighbor. The plan was simple. He would check on the elderly couple, and if they seemed receptive, he would offer to prepare a meal that could last them several days. When Marcus pulled into the Whitmans' driveway, he was pleased to see that someone had made an attempt to shovel a narrow path from the front door to the street. The effort was admirable, but incomplete, suggesting that Eleanor had tried to clear the way, but had quickly become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of snow. Eleanor answered the door before he could knock, her face lighting up with genuine surprise and pleasure. She was dressed more formally than the night before, in a navy blue cardigan and pressed slacks, but Marcus could see the exhaustion that lingered around her eyes. "Marcus, what brings you back? Please don't tell me there was a problem with Robert's medication." "No, ma'am, nothing like that. I had the day off because of the storm, and I wanted to check on you both. Also," he held up the grocery bags and slow cooker, "I thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal." Eleanor's hand flew to her heart, and for a moment Marcus worried he had overstepped some boundary. But then her face broke into the widest smile he had seen from her. "You brought us food after everything you did last night?" She stepped aside to let him in, shaking her head in amazement. "Robert is going to be so pleased to see you. He's been talking about you all morning." Inside the warm house, Marcus found Robert looking significantly better than he had the previous evening. The older man was sitting at the kitchen table rather than confined to his recliner, and while he still had a cough, his breathing seemed less labored, and his color had returned to normal. "Marcus!" Robert's voice was stronger, though still rough around the edges. "Eleanor told me you were coming back, but I hardly dared to believe it. What's all this?" Marcus began unpacking the groceries, explaining his plan to prepare chicken and dumplings that would provide them with several days of nutritious meals. As he worked, he learned more about the Whitmans' life and began to understand the full scope of their situation. Robert had indeed been a high school principal, but not just any principal. He had spent his career at Jefferson High School in one of Denver's most challenging neighborhoods, dedicating his life to helping underprivileged students find paths to success. Eleanor's nursing career had been equally impactful. She had worked in the emergency department for decades, often taking shifts that other nurses avoided because they were too difficult or dangerous. "We always said we wanted to make a difference," Eleanor explained as she watched Marcus expertly prepare the chicken. Robert must have helped thousands of students over the years, many of whom came from situations not unlike your own. The comment caught Marcus off guard. He hadn't mentioned his foster care background in any detail, but Eleanor had clearly picked up on subtle cues from their conversation the night before. "I was in the system from age 8 to 18, Marcus admitted, finding it easier to talk while his hands were busy with food preparation. "Bounced around between a few different homes before landing with Mrs. Rodriguez when I was 16. She was the one who really turned things around for me." Robert leaned forward, his educator's instincts clearly engaged. "What made the difference? I always wondered what happened to students after they left our school, especially the ones who seemed to be struggling with difficult circumstances." Marcus paused in his chopping of vegetables, considering the question seriously. "Consistency, I think. Mrs. Rodriguez was the first adult who made it clear that she wasn't going anywhere, no matter what I did or how badly I messed up. She had high expectations, but she also had patience, and she treated me like I had potential instead of like I was a problem to be managed." Eleanor wiped her eyes with a tissue, clearly moved by Marcus's openness. That's exactly what Robert always tried to do with his students. He believed that every child deserved at least one adult who saw their worth. As the conversation continued, Marcus began to understand that the Whitmans' comfortable lifestyle was the result of a lifetime of careful saving and smart investments. But more importantly, it was built on a foundation of service to others. They had never had children of their own, channeling their parental instincts into their professional lives instead. The chicken and dumplings simmered in the slow cooker, while Marcus helped Robert with some light physical therapy exercises that Eleanor had learned during her nursing career. Robert's illness appeared to have been a severe case of bronchitis rather than anything more serious. But at his age, even minor respiratory issues could become dangerous without proper care and nutrition. "You know," Robert said, as Marcus helped him through some gentle arm stretches, "I've been thinking about what Eleanor told me regarding your sister's education. Pre-med is an expensive path." Marcus nodded, focusing on the exercise routine to avoid the awkwardness he felt whenever the topic of money came up. "Emma's brilliant, though. She'll make it work. She always does." "I'm sure she will," Eleanor chimed in from the kitchen where she was setting the table. "But brilliance shouldn't be held back by financial constraints. Robert and I have been talking, and we'd like to know more about Emma's situation." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a snowplow on their street, its loud scraping and beeping drawing all three of them to the window. The massive machine was making quick work of the accumulated snow, opening up the road and restoring a sense of normalcy to the neighborhood. "Finally," Robert said with relief. "I was starting to worry that we'd be snowed in for days." But Marcus noticed that neither Eleanor nor Robert seemed particularly eager for the outside world to return. They had spent the morning with an energy and engagement that suggested the isolation of the past day had been lonelier than they had initially let on. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself integrated into the Whitmans' daily routine in a way that felt surprisingly natural. He helped Eleanor with some light housework that she had been putting off, assisted Robert with organizing his home office, and listened to stories about their decades of service in education and healthcare. The most touching moment came when Eleanor brought out photo albums from Robert's teaching career. Page after page showed graduation ceremonies, award presentations, and candid shots of Robert with students who had achieved success against difficult odds. Several pages were dedicated to letters from former students, thanking Robert for believing in them when no one else would. "This one came just last month," Eleanor said, pointing to a letter near the back of the album. "From a young woman who's now a pediatric surgeon in Chicago. She wrote to tell Robert that she still carries advice he gave her 25 years ago." Marcus read the letter, struck by the parallels between the student's story and his own. The themes were consistent: a difficult childhood, adults who had given up on the writer, and then Robert's intervention at a crucial moment. The letter credited Robert with changing the trajectory of an entire life. "How many students do you think you influenced like this?" Marcus asked. Robert shrugged modestly. "Hard to say. I just did what felt right at the time. But I'll tell you. Seeing the impact of small acts of kindness, like what you did for us yesterday, reminds me why that work was so important." As evening approached and the chicken and dumplings reached perfection, Marcus realized that something significant had shifted during the day. What had started as a simple welfare check had evolved into something deeper, a genuine connection between three people who had found in each other a kind of family they hadn't known they were missing. The meal they shared was more than just food. It was a communion of sorts. Eleanor and Robert insisted that Marcus call them by their first names, and they pressed him for details about his life, his dreams, and his relationship with Emma. In return, they shared stories about their marriage, their careers, and their quiet retirement years that had been fulfilling but sometimes lonely. "You know," Eleanor said as they finished eating, "we've lived in this house for over 4 decades, and we've had many wonderful neighbors and friends, but I can't remember the last time someone showed us the kind of spontaneous kindness you've demonstrated. It's restored something in us that we didn't even realize we had lost." Robert nodded in agreement. "In my years as an educator, I learned that the most profound changes often come from unexpected places. Yesterday, we thought we were just receiving a prescription delivery. Instead, we received something much more valuable." As Marcus prepared to leave that evening, Eleanor handed him a thermos filled with chicken and dumplings for his own dinner, along with enough for Emma to have a meal when she visited him next. The gesture was simple but deeply meaningful, representing a reciprocity that elevated their relationship beyond mere charity. "Will we see you again?" Robert asked as Marcus bundled up to face the cold evening air. "I'd like that," Marcus replied. And he meant it. "Maybe I could bring Emma by sometime. I think you'd like her." Eleanor's face brightened at the suggestion. "We would love to meet her. Any young woman raising herself to be a doctor while being supported by a brother like you must be quite remarkable." As Marcus drove home through the clear, cold night, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 24 hours. He had started the previous day as a delivery driver doing his job, and now he felt like he had gained something precious, not just friends, but mentors and supporters who genuinely cared about his and Emma's futures. The snow-covered city sparkled under the streetlights, transformed from the threatening maze of the night before into something beautiful and full of possibility. Marcus had no way of knowing that even more dramatic changes awaited him, or that the kindness he had shown the Whitmans would soon return to him in ways he could never have imagined. 3 weeks had passed since the snowstorm, and Marcus had fallen into a comfortable routine of visiting the Whitmans twice a week. What had started as welfare checks had evolved into something that resembled weekly dinners with beloved grandparents. Eleanor had proven to be an excellent cook herself, and their Thursday evening meals had become a highlight that all three of them eagerly anticipated. During these visits, Marcus had learned that the Whitmans' influence extended far beyond their professional careers. Their basement was filled with boxes of correspondence from former students, fellow teachers, and patients whose lives Eleanor had touched during her decades in emergency medicine. They had quietly funded scholarships, helped struggling families with medical bills, and maintained connections with hundreds of people whose lives they had impacted. But on this particular Thursday morning, Marcus received a phone call that would add an entirely new dimension to his relationship with the elderly couple. The caller identified himself as Detective James Morrison from the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you've become acquainted with Robert and Eleanor Whitman. I wonder if we could meet to discuss some matters related to their welfare." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Is something wrong? Are they in some kind of trouble?" "Not exactly," Detective Morrison replied, his tone careful and measured. "But there are some unusual circumstances surrounding their recent activities that we'd like to discuss with someone who knows them personally. Could you meet me at the coffee shop on 16th and Broadway this afternoon?" The rest of Marcus's morning deliveries passed in a blur of worry and speculation. What could the police possibly want with the Whitmans? They were two of the most genuinely good people he had ever met. The thought that they might be in some kind of legal trouble made his chest tighten with anxiety. Detective Morrison turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 40s, with graying temples and kind eyes that reminded Marcus slightly of Robert. They met at Corner Cafe, a busy downtown location where their conversation could blend into the ambient noise of other patrons. "Mr. Thompson, let me start by saying that the Whitmans aren't in any trouble," Detective Morrison began, which immediately eased some of Marcus's tension. "In fact, quite the opposite. We've been investigating some unusual financial activity, and their names have come up in a very interesting context." Morrison pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a series of documents that looked like bank transfers and investment records. "Over the past 5 years, someone has been making anonymous donations to various charities, scholarship funds, and individuals in financial distress. We're talking about significant amounts, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars at a time." Marcus studied the documents, not understanding why this would involve police investigation. "That sounds like a good thing, doesn't it?" "It is a good thing," Morrison agreed, "but the amounts and the patterns triggered some automatic reporting requirements. Banks have to report large cash transactions, and when we investigated, we discovered something remarkable. These donations are all connected to a single source, and they all seem to be related to people who had some connection to Jefferson High School or Denver General Hospital." The detective leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "Mr. Thompson, we believe someone has been systematically tracking down former students and patients, researching their current circumstances, and providing financial assistance to those who need it most. The sophistication of this operation is unlike anything we've seen." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. "You think it's the Whitmans?" "We think it might be," Morrison confirmed. "But here's where it gets complicated. The money isn't coming from their personal accounts. It's being funneled through a series of investment firms and trusts that we've been unable to fully trace. Either they have access to resources we don't know about, or someone else is using their connections to identify worthy recipients. The detective showed Marcus more documents, records of scholarship recipients, families whose medical bills had been mysteriously paid, small businesses that had received anonymous loans during difficult periods. The pattern was clear. Every recipient had some connection to either Robert's teaching career or Eleanor's nursing work. We've interviewed several of the recipients, Morrison continued. Most of them had no idea where the help came from. They received calls from lawyers or financial advisors saying they had been selected for grants or scholarships they never applied for. The common thread is that all of them had interacted with either Robert or Eleanor at some point in their lives. Marcus thought about the photo albums Eleanor had shown him, filled with pictures of students and letters from grateful former pupils. Have you talked to the Whitmans about this? Not yet. That's where you come in. Morrison's expression grew more intense. We need someone they trust to help us understand what's really going on. If they're involved in this charitable operation, we need to make sure it's legitimate and properly documented. If someone else is using their connections for some kind of scheme, they could be in danger. The detective explained that the investigation had uncovered a complex web of financial transactions totaling nearly $2 million over 5 years. The money appeared to be clean, but the anonymity and sophistication of the operation had raised red flags that couldn't be ignored. There's something else, Morrison added, pulling up another document on his tablet. 3 days ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that someone connected to this operation is planning to make contact with you directly. Your name appeared in several encrypted messages we've been monitoring. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. What kind of contact? We're not sure. But given your relationship with the Whitmans and the fact that you've recently provided them with assistance, you may have become part of whatever network is behind these charitable activities. The detective handed Marcus a business card and a small electronic device that looked like a modified cell phone. This is a secure communication device. If anyone approaches you with unusual offers or requests, especially involving money or the Whitmans, I need you to contact me immediately. As Marcus left the coffee shop, his mind raced with questions and concerns. The Whitmans had never mentioned anything about large-scale charitable giving, though their modest contributions to various causes had come up in conversation. But $2 million? That was far beyond what a retired teacher and nurse could typically afford, even with careful saving and investment. That evening's dinner with the Whitmans took on an entirely different character. Marcus found himself studying their faces for signs of deception or hidden knowledge, but they seemed exactly as they always had, warm, genuine, and delighted by his company. Eleanor had prepared her famous pot roast, and Robert was in particularly good spirits, having received another letter from a former student who had recently been promoted to department head at a major corporation. You know, Marcus, Robert said, over dessert, Eleanor and I have been talking about your situation with Emma's education costs. We'd like to help. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. The timing of the offer, so soon after his meeting with Detective Morrison, seemed too coincidental. To be innocent, that's incredibly generous, Marcus managed, but we couldn't accept that kind of help. Emma and I will figure it out. Eleanor reached across the table and patted his hand. Dear, you've given us so much joy these past few weeks. Let us give something back. We have more than we need, and we'd love to see Emma achieve her dreams. How much would you be thinking? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual while his heart pounded. Robert and Eleanor exchanged a glance that seemed loaded with meaning. Well, Robert said slowly. "Medical school is expensive. We were thinking perhaps enough to cover her remaining undergraduate costs and maybe help with medical school applications." The amount they mentioned, $25,000, was substantial but not impossible for a couple of their apparent means. It was also far smaller than the figures Detective Morrison had shown him. Marcus felt torn between gratitude and suspicion. "I need to think about it," Marcus said finally, "and I'd want to talk to Emma first." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. "Take all the time you need. We just want you to know that the offer is there." As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to the Whitmans' conversations and mannerisms. They received several phone calls during dinner, which they apologized for, but took in another room. Their house, which had always seemed comfortable but not luxurious, now struck him as potentially more valuable than he had initially realized. The artwork on the walls, which he had assumed were reproductions, might actually be original, but most troubling was a moment when Eleanor thought he wasn't looking, and he caught her studying him with an intensity that seemed calculating rather than affectionate. When their eyes met, she immediately smiled and resumed her usual warm demeanor, but the brief glimpse of something else left Marcus unsettled. On his way home, Marcus noticed a black sedan that seemed to be following him. When he made several random turns to test his suspicion, the car maintained its distance but continued to mirror his route. By the time he reached his apartment complex, the sedan had disappeared, but Marcus's nerves were thoroughly rattled. Inside his apartment, Marcus called Emma to update her on the Whitmans' offer, but he found himself unable to mention the police investigation or his growing concerns. Emma was thrilled by the prospect of financial help with her education, but she also shared Marcus's instinct that accepting such a large gift felt complicated. "They must really care about you," Emma said, "over the phone. But are you sure they can afford it? I don't want you getting involved in something that might cause problems later." Her intuitive caution echoed Marcus's own growing unease. As he prepared for bed, he made a decision to do some investigating of his own. The next day was Friday, and he would use his lunch break to visit the Denver Public Library and research whatever public records he could find about Robert and Eleanor Whitman. What Marcus discovered the following day would challenge everything he thought he knew about the elderly couple who had become such an important part of his life. Property records showed that the Whitmans owned not just their family home, but 3 other pieces of real estate in Denver, including a small apartment building and 2 commercial properties. Their combined estimated net worth was far higher than he had imagined. More intriguingly, Robert Whitman appeared on the board of directors of several charitable foundations, and Eleanor's name was associated with a medical scholarship fund that had distributed over $500,000 to nursing students over the past decade. The couple were not simply comfortable retirees. They were significant philanthropists with connections throughout Denver's charitable and educational communities. But the most shocking discovery came when Marcus cross-referenced the addresses of the scholarship recipients with Detective Morrison's list of anonymous donation beneficiaries. Nearly half of the names appeared on both lists, suggesting a direct connection between the Whitmans' official charitable work and the mysterious anonymous giving that had attracted police attention. As Marcus sat in the library, surrounded by printouts and notebook pages covered with his research, he realized that his simple act of kindness during a snowstorm had somehow entangled him in a complex web of philanthropy, mystery, and possibly danger. The Whitmans were clearly more than they appeared to be, but whether they were benevolent secret benefactors or something more complicated remained to be determined. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your kindness has been noticed. Tomorrow answers will come. Be ready." Marcus's hands trembled as he read the message. Whatever was happening, it was about to escalate beyond his ability to control or understand. He thought about Detective Morrison's warning and reached for the secure communication device, but something made him hesitate. If the Whitmans were involved in legitimate charitable work, involving the police might destroy whatever good they were trying to accomplish. But if they were involved in something illegal or dangerous, his loyalty to them might put both himself and Emma at risk. As he left the library that afternoon, Marcus realized that the next 24 hours would likely determine whether his act of kindness during the snowstorm had been the best or worst decision of his life. Saturday morning arrived with an unseasonable warmth that melted the last remnants of snow from the storm 3 weeks earlier. Marcus had barely slept, alternating between checking his phone for more mysterious messages and rehearsing conversations he might need to have with Detective Morrison. The cryptic text promising answers had left him on edge, jumping at every sound in his apartment building. At exactly 9:47 a.m., as Marcus was finishing a cup of coffee and debating whether to call the detective, he heard the unmistakable sound of expensive vehicles pulling into his apartment complex's parking lot. The rumble of powerful engines was out of place in his modest neighborhood, where most residents drove economy cars or aging pickup trucks. Peering through his second-floor window, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. A gleaming black limousine had parked directly in front of his building, accompanied by 2 identical black SUVs that positioned themselves at strategic points around the parking lot. The vehicles were so pristine they seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously, giving them an almost otherworldly presence against the backdrop of his working-class neighborhood. Marcus grabbed his phone to call Detective Morrison, but before he could dial, there was a firm knock at his door. 3 measured raps, followed by a pause, then 3 more. The sound was confident but not threatening, suggesting someone accustomed to being welcomed rather than feared. Through the peephole, Marcus saw a tall, impeccably dressed man in his 50s wearing a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. The man's silver hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Behind him, Marcus could make out 2 other figures in similar attire, though they maintained a respectful distance. "Mr. Thompson?" the man called out, his voice cultured and warm. "My name is Jonathan Whitman. I believe you know my parents, Robert and Eleanor. Might I have a word with you?" Marcus's hand froze on the door handle. Jonathan Whitman. The Whitmans had mentioned their children lived out of state, but they had never provided many details about their families. The presence of this obviously wealthy and powerful man at his door suddenly recontextualized everything he thought he knew about the elderly couple. "I'm not looking for trouble," Marcus called through the door. "If this is about money or something illegal, I don't know anything about it." Jonathan's laugh was genuine and reassuring. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you this has nothing to do with anything illegal. Quite the opposite, in fact. I'm here because my parents have told me extraordinary things about your character, and I'd like to discuss a proposition that could benefit everyone involved." Against his better judgment, Marcus opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. Jonathan Whitman's appearance up close was even more impressive than it had been through the peephole. His suit was clearly custom-tailored, his shoes were Italian leather, and he wore a watch that Marcus recognized as a Patek Philippe from a magazine article he had once read about luxury timepieces. "Mr. Thompson, I understand your caution. May I suggest we sit down somewhere more comfortable to discuss this? Perhaps the coffee shop down the street? I'd be happy to explain everything." Marcus looked past Jonathan to the limousine and SUVs. "What's with the entourage?" "Security," Jonathan replied matter-of-factly. "Unfortunately, a necessary precaution in my line of work. But I promise you, this meeting is entirely friendly. In fact, I believe you'll find it quite beneficial." After a moment's hesitation, Marcus agreed to accompany Jonathan to the nearby coffee shop, though he brought Detective Morrison's secure communication device and made sure it was recording. The short walk to the cafe attracted considerable attention from his neighbors, who had never seen such expensive vehicles in their parking lot. At the coffee shop, Jonathan selected a corner table that afforded privacy, while his security team positioned themselves discreetly throughout the establishment. Up close, Marcus could see the family resemblance between Jonathan and Robert. The same intelligent eyes and thoughtful expression, though Jonathan carried himself with a confidence that spoke of significant wealth and influence. "Let me start by thanking you," Jonathan began once they were settled with their drinks. "What you did for my parents during the snowstorm was exactly the kind of compassion and integrity they've spent their lives trying to foster in others. They've told me about your visits, your cooking, and your genuine friendship. It's meant more to them than you might realize." Marcus studied Jonathan's face for signs of deception, but found only sincerity. "They're wonderful people. I've enjoyed getting to know them." "I'm sure you have questions about my family's circumstances," Jonathan continued. "The truth is, the Whitmans are not quite what they appear to be. My parents chose to live modestly and focus on their careers in public service, but our family has been fortunate in other ways." Jonathan pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a series of business profiles and financial documents. "I'm the CEO of Whitman Industries, a conglomerate that includes manufacturing, technology, and financial services companies. We employ over 30,000 people across North America and Europe." The numbers on the screen were staggering. Whitman Industries was apparently worth several $billions, with Jonathan listed as the primary shareholder and chairman of the board. Marcus felt his understanding of reality shift dramatically as he processed this information. "Your parents are sitting on this kind of wealth, and they're living like middle-class retirees," Jonathan smiled. "That's exactly who they are, Mr. Thompson. My father could have joined the family business after college, but he chose to become a teacher because he believed education was more important than profit. My mother could have worked in private practice and made far more money, but she chose emergency medicine because she wanted to help people who couldn't afford quality health care." The tablet showed additional information about the Whitman family's philanthropic activities. Over the past 2 decades, they had donated over $50 million to various causes, with a particular focus on education and healthcare initiatives. The anonymous donations that had attracted Detective Morrison's attention were apparently just the tip of a much larger iceberg. "The police investigation," Marcus said suddenly. "Detective Morrison showed me documents about anonymous charitable giving. That's your family?" Jonathan nodded. "Among other things, yes. We've been working with several law enforcement agencies to ensure our charitable activities comply with all regulations. Detective Morrison is actually part of a task force that helps legitimate philanthropic organizations navigate complex financial reporting requirements." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. His suspicions about the Whitmans had been completely unfounded, and his worry about being involved in something illegal suddenly seemed foolish. But why all the secrecy? Why not just give money openly? "Several reasons," Jonathan explained. "First, public philanthropic giving often comes with expectations and obligations that can be problematic. People start to see you as a source of funding rather than as individuals. Second, my parents specifically requested that their giving remain anonymous because they didn't want recognition. They wanted results." Jonathan showed Marcus additional documents detailing the impact of the family's charitable work. Hundreds of scholarships, medical bill payments, small business loans, and emergency assistance grants had been distributed over the years, all traced back to people who had some connection to Robert or Eleanor's professional lives. "But here's where you come in, Mr. Thompson," Jonathan said, his tone becoming more serious. "My parents are getting older, and they've been looking for ways to ensure their philanthropic work continues after they're gone. Your actions during The snowstorm and your subsequent friendship with them have convinced them that you might be the right person to help carry on their legacy. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. I don't understand what you're asking. Jonathan leaned forward, his expression intense but kind. We'd like to offer you a position with Whitman Industries, specifically overseeing our charitable foundation. The job would involve identifying worthy recipients, managing grant distributions, and ensuring that our philanthropic goals are met. The salary would be substantial, enough to secure Emma's medical education and provide you with financial security for life. The offer was so unexpected and overwhelming that Marcus couldn't immediately process it. A job with a multi-billion-dollar company, financial security, Emma's education guaranteed. It seemed too good to be true. What would be expected of me? Essentially, you'd be doing what you've already demonstrated you do naturally, identifying people in need and finding ways to help them. You'd have access to significant resources and a team of professionals to help implement assistance programs. Think of it as being a professional Good Samaritan. Jonathan explained that the position would require Marcus to relocate to Whitman Industries headquarters in Chicago, where he would work with a team of social workers, financial advisors, and program coordinators. The salary he mentioned was more than Marcus had ever imagined earning, enough to not only secure Emma's education, but to provide both of them with a lifestyle they had never dreamed possible. There's one more thing, Jonathan added, sliding another document across the table. As a signing bonus, we'd like to establish a scholarship fund in your name at the University of Colorado, specifically for students from foster care backgrounds pursuing careers in healthcare or education. The initial endowment would be $1 million. Marcus stared at the document, unable to fully comprehend what he was reading. $1 million scholarship fund in his name, helping kids like himself achieve their educational dreams. It was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Possible? Why me? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because my parents have spent their entire lives learning to recognize genuine character, Jonathan replied. They've seen thousands of people in various circumstances, and they've developed an instinct for identifying those who can be trusted. With significant responsibility, your actions during and after the snowstorm demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and compassion we need in someone who would be distributing millions of dollars to people in need. Jonathan gave Marcus a business card with contact information and stood to leave. I don't need an answer immediately, but I'd appreciate your decision within the next week. In the meantime, I'd encourage you to visit my parents this evening. They're eager to discuss this opportunity with you in person. As Jonathan prepared to leave, he turned back to Marcus with a final thought. Mr. Thompson, success in business often comes from recognizing opportunities and having the courage to act on them. You demonstrated both of those qualities during the snowstorm. This is simply a much larger opportunity to do the same thing. Marcus sat in the coffee shop for nearly an hour after Jonathan left, trying to process everything that had just happened. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma asking about his weekend plans, and he realized that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't have imagined when he woke up that morning. The secure communication device Detective Morrison had given him remained silent, and Marcus wondered if he should contact the detective to report the meeting. But given what Jonathan had revealed about the family's cooperation with law enforcement, it seemed the investigation was more about compliance than criminal activity. As he walked back to his apartment, passing the space where the limousine had been parked, Marcus felt as though he was moving through a dream. The modest neighborhood that had been his home for 3 years suddenly felt temporary, like a stage set that would soon be struck and replaced with something entirely different. Inside his apartment, Marcus looked around at his few possessions and tried to imagine the life Jonathan had described. A career helping others, financial security, Emma's dreams secured, and the opportunity to make a difference on a scale he had never thought possible. But first, he needed to have a conversation with Robert and Eleanor, the two people who had, somehow, orchestrated this dramatic change in his circumstances through what appeared to be a lifetime of carefully observing and nurturing human potential. That evening, Marcus drove to the Whitmans' house with his mind churning through 1,000 questions and emotions. The familiar route through their neighborhood looked different now, as if he was seeing it through new eyes that understood the true scope of wealth and influence his elderly friends possessed. The modest colonial that had seemed like a comfortable, middle-class home now appeared to be a deliberate choice to live below their means rather than a reflection of their actual circumstances. Eleanor greeted him at the door with her usual warm smile, but Marcus could now detect a hint of nervous anticipation in her demeanor. She was dressed more formally than usual in a navy blue dress that he now realized was probably designer quality, and she wore a pearl necklace that looked genuinely valuable rather than costume jewelry. "Marcus, dear, come in. Robert is waiting. In the study. We have so much to discuss." The study was a room Marcus had glimpsed before, but never entered. Tonight, Eleanor led him into what was clearly Robert's domain, a wood-paneled room lined with bookshelves from floor to ceiling, containing what appeared to be a mixture of educational texts, classic literature, and business publications. A large mahogany desk dominated one corner, and Marcus noticed several framed photographs that showed Robert with various dignitaries and public figures he didn't immediately recognize. Robert was seated in a leather armchair near a fireplace, where a small fire crackled warmly. He looked up as they entered, his expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Marcus, please sit down. I imagine Jonathan's visit this morning has left you with many questions." Marcus settled into the chair across from Robert, noting that even the furniture in this room was of a quality and craftsmanship that suggested significant expense. "I'm still trying to process everything he told me. I feel like I don't really know who you are." Eleanor and Robert exchanged a glance that seemed to communicate volumes. Eleanor took a seat on a small sofa near the fireplace, and Robert leaned forward in his chair. "That's understandable, and I want to apologize for not being completely transparent with you from the beginning," Robert said. "But I hope you'll understand our reasons once we explain everything." Robert began by telling Marcus about his family, history. The Whitmans had been successful in business for 3 generations, starting with Robert's grandfather, who had built a small manufacturing company into a regional enterprise. Robert's father had expanded the business nationally, and by the time Robert graduated from college, Whitman Industries was already a significant corporation. "I was expected to join the family business immediately after graduation," Robert explained. "The plan was for me to work my way up through the company and eventually take over from my father. But I had other ideas. Instead of entering the business world, Robert had chosen to pursue education, much to his family's initial dismay. He had earned a master's degree in education and taken his first teaching job at Jefferson High School, working in one of Denver's most challenging districts for a salary that was a fraction of what he could have earned in the family business. My parents thought I was throwing my life away," Robert continued. "They couldn't understand why I would choose to work with underprivileged teenagers when I could have been running board meetings and making investment decisions." Eleanor picked up the story, explaining her own background. Her family had been middle class, and she had worked her way through nursing school with scholarships and part-time jobs. When she met Robert during her training at Denver General Hospital, she had no idea about his family's wealth. "Robert kept his background completely secret during our courtship," Eleanor said with a fond smile. I fell in love with a dedicated teacher who drove an old car and lived in a tiny apartment. I didn't learn about Whitman Industries until after. We were engaged. The revelation had initially caused tension in their relationship. Eleanor had worried that Robert's family would never accept her, and she had questioned whether their different backgrounds would create insurmountable problems. But Robert had been determined to build a life based on their shared values rather than his family's expectations. We made a decision early in our marriage, Robert continued. We would live on our salaries from teaching and nursing, and we would use the family wealth only for helping others. My father eventually came to respect our choice, especially when he saw the impact of our philanthropic work. Over the decades, Robert had maintained a relationship with Whitman Industries, serving on the board of directors and providing input on major decisions, but always from the perspective of someone committed to social responsibility rather than pure profit maximization. His influence had helped steer the company toward more ethical business practices and substantial charitable giving. The anonymous donations Detective Morrison told you about, Eleanor explained, those are just one small part of what we've been doing. We've established scholarship funds, medical assistance programs, small business loan initiatives, and emergency relief funds. But we've always insisted that the recipients never know the source of the help. Marcus listened with growing amazement as the Whitmans detailed the scope of their charitable activities. Over their 40-year marriage, they had quietly distributed over $100 million to people in need, focusing particularly on individuals who had some connection to their professional lives, but extending help to anyone whose circumstances touched their hearts. But why all the secrecy? Marcus asked. Why not just be open about what you're doing? Robert's expression grew more serious. Several reasons. First, we wanted the recipients to feel that they had earned their opportunities rather than receiving charity. A scholarship that appears to come from an educational foundation feels different than one that comes from wealthy benefactors. Second, we wanted to avoid being overwhelmed by requests for help. If people knew about our resources, we would have been inundated with appeals, and we wouldn't have been able to focus our efforts effectively. Eleanor added another perspective. We also wanted to maintain our relationships with colleagues and neighbors as equals, rather than as wealthy patrons. When people know you have significant money, it changes how they interact with you. We valued the authentic connections we made as a teacher and nurse. The conversation turned to how they had identified worthy recipients over the years. The process was more sophisticated than Marcus had imagined. The Whitmans had worked with a team of social workers, financial advisors, and private investigators to research the circumstances of former students, patients, and their families. They looked for people who were working hard but facing circumstances beyond their control, individuals who would use assistance to build better lives rather than simply solve temporary problems. Your situation caught our attention long before the snowstorm, Robert revealed. We had been watching you for months. Marcus felt a chill of surprise. Watching me? Eleanor smiled reassuringly. Not in a sinister way, dear. But Quick Cart Delivery has a contract with several businesses in our neighborhood, and we had noticed your exceptional work ethic and kindness to customers. We had already begun researching your background when the storm brought you to our door. The research had revealed Marcus's foster care history, his dedication to supporting Emma's education, his spotless work record, and his reputation among Quickcart customers as someone who went above and beyond his job requirements. The Whitmans had been impressed by what they learned, but they needed to see his character firsthand before making any decisions about offering assistance. The snowstorm was providential, Robert said. It gave us an opportunity to observe how you respond to people in need when you have nothing to gain from helping them. Your actions that night and your continued friendship with us over the past few weeks confirmed everything we had hoped about your character. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the revelation that his life had been under observation, but he also felt touched by the care and thoroughness the Whitmans had demonstrated in getting to know him. Their approach to philanthropy was clearly based on building genuine relationships rather than simply writing checks. "Jonathan's offer," Eleanor said, bringing the conversation to the heart of their evening's discussion, "represents something we've been planning for several years. We're both in our late 70s, and while we're healthy now, we know we need to make arrangements for continuing our philanthropic work after we're gone." The position Jonathan had described would involve much more than Marcus had initially understood. As head of the Whitman Foundation, he would oversee the distribution of approximately $20 million annually to individuals and organizations in need. He would work with a team of professionals to identify recipients, design assistance programs, and ensure that help reached people who would use it effectively. But the most important part of the job, Robert emphasized, is maintaining the personal touch that has always been central to our approach. We don't want to become just another large foundation that processes applications and writes checks. We want to continue building relationships with the people we help, understanding their stories and providing support that goes beyond money. Marcus would be expected to visit recipients, follow up on their progress, and serve as a mentor and advocate for people working to improve their circumstances. The role would combine elements of social work, business management, and personal counseling, requiring someone with both practical skills and genuine empathy. "The salary Jonathan mentioned," Eleanor said, "is substantial because we want you to be able to focus entirely on this work without worrying about your own financial security. We've seen too many well-intentioned people burn out because they were trying to help others while struggling with their own problems." The conversation continued late into the evening, with the Whitmans sharing stories about some of their most successful interventions over the years. They told Marcus about former students who had become doctors, teachers, and business leaders with the help of anonymous scholarships. They described families who had avoided bankruptcy because of mysterious medical bill payments and small businesses that had survived difficult periods thanks to unexplained loans with generous repayment terms. "The most rewarding part," Eleanor said, "has been watching people pass on the kindness they received. Many of our scholarship recipients have gone on to establish their own charitable programs. Some of the families we helped have become volunteers with organizations that assist others in similar circumstances. The ripple effect of strategic philanthropy can last for generations." As the evening drew to a close, Marcus felt as though his understanding of the world had been fundamentally altered. The Whitmans had shown him that wealth could be a tool for creating positive change on a massive scale, but only when combined with wisdom, patience, and genuine caring for others. "I need some time to think about all of this," Marcus said as he prepared to leave. "It's an incredible opportunity, but it's also a huge responsibility." "Of course," Robert replied. "Take all the time you need. But I will say this. We've spent 40 years learning how to identify people who can be trusted with significant resources and responsibility. We wouldn't be making this offer if we weren't confident in your ability to succeed." As Marcus drove home that night, he realized that his simple act of helping an elderly couple during a snowstorm had revealed a hidden world of strategic philanthropy and social responsibility that he never knew existed. The decision he faced would determine not only his own future and Emma's, but potentially the futures of thousands of people who might benefit from the Whitman Foundation's work in the years to come. The week following Marcus's revelation-filled evening with the Whitmans passed in a blur of careful consideration and emotional turbulence. He had taken several days off from quick cart delivery, using accumulated vacation time to process the magnitude of the decision before him. His small apartment, which had always felt adequate if modest, now seemed to represent the crossroads. Between his current life and an unimaginable future, Emma arrived from Boulder on Wednesday morning, having sensed from their phone conversations that something significant was happening in her brother's life. Marcus had been deliberately vague about the details, wanting to discuss everything in person rather than try to explain the complex situation over the phone. "Okay, Marcus," Emma said as soon as she walked into his apartment. "You've been acting weird for days. What's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing, because I know you too well." Marcus had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, but facing his sister's direct gaze made him realize how surreal the situation truly was. He began with the Snowstorm delivery and worked his way through the developing friendship with the Whitmans, Jonathan's dramatic arrival, and the job offer that could change both of their lives forever. Emma listened with growing amazement, occasionally interrupting with questions that demonstrated her sharp analytical mind. When Marcus finished explaining everything, she sat in stunned silence for several long moments. "Let me get this straight," she finally said. "The sweet elderly couple you've been having dinner with are actually worth billions of dollars, and they want to put you in charge of giving away millions of dollars every year to help people. That's essentially it." "Yes." Emma stood up and began pacing around the small living room, a habit she'd developed when processing complex information. "And they've been secretly observing you for months, determining whether you're trustworthy enough for this responsibility, apparently. Marcus, this is insane. This is like something out of a movie." She stopped pacing and looked directly at him. "But it's also incredible. Do you realize what this means? Not just for us, but for all the people you could help." Over the next several hours, Emma helped Marcus work through the practical implications of accepting the position. They made lists of pros and cons, discussed the challenges of relocating to Chicago, and explored what the job would actually entail on a day-to-day basis. Emma's pre-med background gave her a systematic approach to decision-making that complemented Marcus's more intuitive thinking. "The salary alone would solve every financial worry we've ever had," Emma pointed out. "I could focus entirely on my studies without working part-time jobs, and you could pursue work that's actually meaningful instead of just paying bills." But they also discussed the potential downsides. Marcus would be leaving behind the life he had built in Denver, moving to a city where he knew no one except the Whitmans family. The responsibility of managing such large amounts of money and making decisions that could dramatically impact people's lives was daunting. There was also the question of whether he was truly qualified for such a position, despite the Whitmans' confidence in his abilities. "Have you ever thought about what you really want to do with your life?" Emma asked during one of their conversations. "I mean, beyond just surviving and making sure I get through school." The question caught Marcus off guard. He had been so focused on practical concerns for so many years that he had rarely allowed himself to think about deeper ambitions or dreams. But as he considered Emma's question, he realized that some part of him had always been drawn to helping others, even in small ways. His reputation at QuickCart for going above and beyond for customers wasn't just about work ethic. It reflected a genuine desire to make people's days a little better. "I think I'd like to matter," Marcus said finally. "I want to feel like my life has made a difference for other people." Emma smiled. "Then you already know what you need to do." That evening, Marcus drove to the Whitmans' house for what he expected to be his final dinner as a quick-cart delivery driver. He had called ahead to let them know he was ready to discuss his decision, and both Eleanor and Robert seemed to sense the significance of the evening. Eleanor had prepared a special meal, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, a recipe, she said, had been in Robert's family for generations. The dining room was set with fine china and crystal glasses that Marcus now recognized as genuinely valuable rather than simply elegant. The atmosphere was celebratory, but also tinged with the solemnity of a major life transition. "Before we discuss your decision," Robert said as they began eating, "Eleanor and I want you to know that we'll respect whatever choice you make. If you decide this opportunity isn't right for you, it won't change our friendship or our desire to help you and Emma in other ways." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "We've grown genuinely fond of you, Marcus. Our offer comes from a desire to find the right person for this work, but it's also motivated by our care for you as an individual." Marcus felt touched by their reassurance, but he could also sense their hope that he would accept the position. Over the past week, he had come to understand that the Whitmans saw him as more than just a potential employee. They viewed him as a successor to their philanthropic mission, someone who could carry forward their values and approaches while bringing his own perspective and energy to the work. "I've made my decision," Marcus said, setting down his fork and looking directly at both of them. "I want to accept the position." The relief and joy that spread across the Whitmans' faces was immediate and unmistakable. Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze his hand, and Robert's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "You've made an old man very happy," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how excited I am to see what you'll accomplish with this opportunity." The rest of the evening was spent discussing practical details and timelines. Jonathan had already arranged for a relocation package that would handle all of Marcus's moving expenses and help him find suitable housing in Chicago. The position would begin with a 3-month training period, during which Marcus would work closely with the existing foundation staff to learn the systems and procedures they had developed over the years. "There's one more surprise," Eleanor said as they moved to the living room for dessert. "We've arranged for Emma to transfer to Northwestern University for her final 2 years of undergraduate study. They have an excellent pre-med program, and we have connections there that can help ensure she gets the support she needs to succeed." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the arrangement. Northwestern was one of the top universities in the country, and Emma's acceptance there would virtually guarantee her admission to medical school afterward. "How did you arrange that so quickly?" Robert smiled. "We may live quietly, but we do have some influence in academic circles. Emma's grades and test scores are excellent, and Northwestern is always interested in talented students who bring diverse perspectives to their programs." As the evening continued, the Whitmans shared more details about what Marcus could expect in his new role. The Whitman Foundation occupied an entire floor of a building in downtown Chicago with a staff of 12 professionals, including social workers, financial analysts, program coordinators, and administrative assistants. Marcus would have an experienced deputy director to help him learn the ropes, and he would be supported by systems and procedures that had been refined over decades of philanthropic work. "The most important thing to remember," Eleanor emphasized, "is that this work is about people, not just money. Every grant, every scholarship, every assistance program represents someone's hopes and dreams. The money is just a tool. The real impact comes from understanding people's circumstances and finding ways to help them build better futures." The Foundation's approach was methodical but personal. They maintained databases of former recipients, tracking their progress and celebrating their successes. Many people who had received help years earlier had gone on to become donors themselves, creating a network of individuals committed to paying forward the assistance they had received. "You'll also have the opportunity to develop new programs," Robert explained. "We've focused primarily on education and healthcare, but there may be other areas where strategic intervention could make a significant difference. We're hoping you'll bring fresh perspectives and ideas to the work." As the evening drew to a close, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The magnitude of the opportunity was still difficult to fully comprehend, but he was beginning to understand how his life was about to change in fundamental ways. "There's one last thing," Eleanor said as Marcus prepared to leave. "We want you to know that this isn't just a job offer. It's an invitation to become part of our family. You and Emma will always have a place in our lives, regardless of how your career develops." The comment touched Marcus deeply, reminding him that the most valuable aspect of this entire experience had been the genuine friendship and mentorship the Whitmans had provided. The job opportunity was extraordinary, but the personal connection was irreplaceable. Over the following 2 weeks, Marcus's life transformed with remarkable speed. He gave notice at Quick Cart Delivery, explaining to his supervisor only that he had received an unexpected job offer that he couldn't refuse. His co-workers were surprised but happy for him, though they couldn't hide their curiosity about the mysterious new position. Emma's transfer to Northwestern was expedited through channels that seemed almost magical in their efficiency. Within days, she had been accepted. Her financial aid package had been arranged and housing had been secured in one of the university's best dormitories. The transition that should have taken months was accomplished in weeks. Jonathan arranged for a moving company to pack and transport Marcus's belongings to Chicago, where a furnished apartment had been secured in a building near the Foundation's offices. The apartment was larger and more luxurious than anywhere Marcus had ever lived, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Lake Michigan and downtown Chicago's impressive skyline. On his final evening in Denver, Marcus returned to the Whitmans' house for a farewell dinner. The occasion was bittersweet, marking the end of their weekly tradition, but also celebrating the beginning of Marcus's new chapter. "We'll miss our Thursday dinners," Eleanor said as they shared a final meal together. "But we're so excited to see what you accomplish in Chicago." Robert raised his glass in a toast to Marcus, who showed us that kindness and integrity still exist in the world, and who will now help us share those values with others. As Marcus drove away from the Whitmans' house that final evening, he reflected on how a simple delivery during a snowstorm had led to the most significant opportunity of his life. The quiet neighborhood where it all began looked exactly the same, but Marcus knew he was leaving as a fundamentally different person than he had been just a month earlier. The following morning brought an unexpected visit from Detective Morrison, who appeared at Marcus's apartment door with a briefcase and a warm smile. Marcus invited him in, curious about what had brought the detective to see him on his last day in Denver. "I heard through official channels that you'll be joining the Whitman Foundation," Morrison said, settling into Marcus's now empty living room. "I wanted to personally congratulate you and provide some context about our investigation that might be helpful as you begin your new role." Morrison opened his briefcase and pulled out several thick folders. "Our financial crimes unit has been working with the Whitman family for over 2 years, not because they were suspected of wrongdoing, but because they requested our assistance in ensuring their philanthropic activities met all federal and state compliance requirements." The detective explained that the Whitmans had voluntarily submitted to extensive financial auditing when they decided to expand their charitable giving significantly. They wanted to make certain that every donation was properly documented and that their methods couldn't be misinterpreted by regulatory agencies. "What we discovered," Morrison continued, "was one of the most sophisticated and effective private philanthropy operations in the country. The Whitmans have created a model that other wealthy families are now trying to replicate." Morrison showed Marcus documentation of the foundation's impact over the past decade. The numbers were staggering. Over 2,000 individuals had received direct assistance, 500 students had been provided with full or partial scholarships, 150 small businesses had received emergency loans, and 75 families had been saved from medical bankruptcy through anonymous intervention. But the most impressive aspect, Morrison emphasized, is their success rate. Over 90% of scholarship recipients have graduated from their programs. 85% of business loan recipients have repaid their assistance and remained viable. And virtually every family that received medical assistance has gone on to stable financial situations. The detective revealed that law enforcement agencies across the country had begun consulting with the Whitman Foundation to understand their screening and selection processes, their methods for identifying worthy recipients and providing effective assistance had become a case study in strategic philanthropy. "Your predecessor," Morrison said, referring to the person who had managed the foundation before Marcus, was a former FBI agent with extensive experience in background investigations. The Whitmans chose her specifically because they needed someone who could thoroughly vet potential recipients and ensure that assistance went to people who would use it constructively. Marcus felt a new wave of responsibility as he understood the professional caliber of the person he would be replacing. Morrison assured him that the Whitmans' confidence in his character was well-founded, but the revelation underscored the seriousness of the position he was about to assume. "There's something else you should know," Morrison added. "The federal government has been considering legislation that would provide tax incentives for private philanthropy programs that meet certain effectiveness standards. The Whitman Foundation's model is being used as the benchmark for these proposed regulations." The detective's visit lasted nearly 2 hours, during which he provided Marcus with detailed briefings on various aspects of foundation operations that weren't immediately obvious. The legal requirements for large-scale charitable giving were complex, involving multiple government agencies and extensive documentation requirements. Morrison also explained the security considerations that came with Marcus's new position. As the head of a foundation distributing millions of dollars annually, he would inevitably become a target for various types of fraud and manipulation. The foundation employed a private security firm to conduct background checks on all potential recipients and to monitor for any signs of organized attempts to exploit their generosity. "The most important advice I can give you," Morrison concluded, "is to trust the systems the Whitmans have established, but never hesitate to ask questions if something seems unusual. Their success has been built on careful verification and systematic follow-up, not just good intentions." After the detective left, Marcus spent his remaining hours in Denver visiting places that had been significant during his 3 years in the city. He drove past the foster home where he had lived before aging out of the system, the community college where he had taken evening classes while working full-time, and the quick cart dispatch center where he had started as a temporary employee and worked his way up to senior driver status. Each location represented a different phase of his journey, from homeless teenager to successful adult, reminding him of the obstacles he had overcome and the people who had helped him along the way. Mrs. Rodriguez, his final foster mother, had passed away 2 years earlier, but Marcus stopped by her grave to share the news of his new opportunity and to thank her once again for the stability and guidance she had provided during his crucial teenage years. The drive past Jefferson High School, where Robert had spent his career, was particularly meaningful. Marcus parked across the street and watched students leaving the building at the end of the school day, many of them from backgrounds similar to his own. Some were clearly struggling with the same challenges he had faced: inadequate clothing, obvious signs of family stress, the defensive postures that came from dealing with uncertainty and instability. For the first time, Marcus truly understood the scope of the opportunity Robert and Eleanor had created for him. Every student walking past represented someone who might benefit from the Foundation's assistance in the years to come. The scholarship programs, emergency assistance funds, and mentorship opportunities could provide these young people with the same kind of support that had helped Marcus build a stable life. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma, who was already in Chicago getting settled at Northwestern. Her message included photos of her new dormitory room and the campus, along with expressions of excitement about beginning classes the following week. The transformation in Emma's circumstances was almost as dramatic as Marcus's own. She had gone from attending a good state university while working multiple part-time jobs to studying at one of the nation's most prestigious institutions with all financial worries eliminated. That evening, Marcus received an unexpected call from Jonathan Whitman, who was checking in before Marcus's departure the next morning. Jonathan's tone was warm, but also businesslike as he outlined the schedule for Marcus's first week in Chicago. "Monday morning, you'll meet with the Foundation's senior staff," Jonathan explained. "They're excited to work with you and they've prepared comprehensive briefings on all current programs and pending applications. Tuesday, we'll tour some of the organizations we partner with, and Wednesday, you'll observe recipient interviews to understand our evaluation process." Jonathan also mentioned that Robert and Eleanor would be visiting Chicago the following month to help with Marcus's transition and to introduce him to various community leaders and potential partners. Their network of contacts in education, healthcare, and social services would be crucial resources as Marcus learned to navigate his new responsibilities. "There's one more thing," Jonathan added. "My parents asked me to tell you that they're proud of the decision you've made, not just to accept the position, but to approach it with the seriousness and thoughtfulness you've demonstrated throughout this process." As Marcus's final night in Denver drew to a close, he found himself unable to sleep, energized by anticipation and nervous excitement about the dramatic change his life was about to undergo. He walked through his empty apartment one last time, checking that he hadn't forgotten anything important and pausing to look out the window at the city lights that had been his view for 3 years. The moving truck would arrive at 8 a.m. to transport his belongings to Chicago, and his flight was scheduled for early afternoon. By evening, he would be in his new apartment, looking out at Lake Michigan instead of the modest parking lot that had been his previous view. At midnight, Marcus received a final text message from an unknown number. "Your journey of kindness has inspired more people than you know. The work ahead will touch thousands of lives. Welcome to your true calling." Marcus never discovered who sent the message, but he saved it as a reminder of the responsibility and opportunity that awaited him. As he finally drifted off to sleep on his last night as a Denver delivery driver, Marcus dreamed of the lives he might help change and the legacy he might build through careful stewardship of the Whitman's philanthropic vision. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities that he was still learning to comprehend. But tonight, as he prepared to begin a new life, Marcus felt grateful for the reminder that extraordinary opportunities could emerge from ordinary acts of kindness, and that the most important decisions often came disguised as simple choices to help someone in need. 6 months after that fateful snowstorm in Denver, Marcus stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Whitman Foundation building, looking out at the Chicago skyline as morning light reflected off Lake Michigan. The view still took his breath away, but more importantly, the work he was doing had transformed his understanding of what one person could accomplish when given the right resources and support. The transition to his new role had been both challenging and exhilarating. The Foundation's operations were far more complex than he had initially imagined, involving intricate networks of partner organizations, sophisticated evaluation processes, and careful coordination with legal and financial professionals. But Marcus had discovered that his years of customer service and his instinctive understanding of people struggling to make ends meet gave him unique insights that complemented the team's existing expertise. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Foundation's deputy director and Marcus's primary mentor, knocked on his office door and entered with a stack of files and her characteristic warm smile. Sarah had been with the Foundation for 8 years, having joined after completing her doctorate in social work and spending several years in community organizing. Her guidance had been invaluable as Marcus learned to navigate the complexities of large-scale philanthropy. "Ready for this morning's recipient interviews?" she asked, settling into one of the chairs across from Marcus's desk. "We have some particularly interesting cases to review." The Foundation conducted in-person interviews with potential recipients whenever possible, a practice that set them apart from most charitable organizations. While many foundations relied primarily on written applications and documentation, the Whitmans had always insisted on face-to-face meetings to better understand each person's circumstances and character. "Tell me about the first appointment," Marcus said, reviewing his schedule. "Maria Gonzalez, 34 years old, single mother of 2 teenagers. She's been working as a certified nursing assistant while taking classes to become a registered nurse. Her car broke down last month and she can't afford repairs. Without transportation, she'll have to drop out of the nursing program because her clinical rotations are at hospitals across the city." Sarah handed Marcus the comprehensive background report their team had prepared. Maria's story was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She had escaped an abusive marriage 3 years earlier, taking her children and starting over with virtually nothing. Despite working full-time and caring for her teenagers, she had maintained a 3.8 GPA in her nursing program and was just 18 months away from graduation. Her younger son has autism, and she's been advocating for better special education services in their school district, Sarah continued. The teachers and administrators describe her as one of the most dedicated parents they've ever worked with. But she's exhausted and struggling financially. Marcus studied the documentation, noting the letters of recommendation from Maria's employers, instructors, and even neighbors who had witnessed her determination and kindness. The Foundation's investigation had revealed that Maria often shared her limited resources with other struggling families in her apartment complex, organizing meal trains for sick neighbors and tutoring other parents studying for their GED exams. "What's our recommendation?" "Full assistance package," Sarah replied. "Car repair costs, plus a modest monthly stipend to help with living expenses until she graduates and starts working as an RN. Total investment would be about $15,000 over 18 months. The amount was relatively small by Foundation standards, but Marcus had learned that strategic intervention at crucial moments could have enormous long-term impact. When Maria graduated and began earning an RN's salary, she would achieve financial stability that would benefit not only her family, but everyone she would help in her nursing career. "Schedule the interview," Marcus decided. "I want to meet her." The morning's interviews proved to be typical of the Foundation's work. Each case represented someone whose life could be dramatically improved through relatively modest assistance. But only if that help came at exactly the right moment. A veteran struggling with PTSD who needed funding for a service dog training program. A former foster youth who had been accepted to law school but couldn't afford the deposit to secure housing near campus. An elderly man caring for his disabled adult daughter who needed home modifications to make their house wheelchair accessible. Each story reminded Marcus of his own journey and the crucial moments when assistance from caring adults had made the difference between success and failure. The Foundation's approach wasn't about creating dependency, but about removing specific obstacles that prevented people from achieving their potential. After the interviews, Marcus walked to the Foundation's conference room where the monthly board meeting was about to begin. Robert and Eleanor had traveled from Denver for the meeting, as they did every month, and their presence still brought Marcus a sense of comfort and gratitude that he suspected would never fade. "Marcus, you look wonderful," Eleanor said, embracing him warmly. "Chicago is agreeing with you." Robert shook his hand with obvious pride. "Sarah tells us you've been making some excellent decisions about program modifications. We're eager to hear your presentation." The monthly board meetings had become Marcus's favorite part of his job. They provided an opportunity to share success stories, discuss challenges, and propose new initiatives with the Foundation's governing body. Today's agenda included his proposal for a new program specifically designed to help former foster youth transition to independent adulthood. "The statistics are sobering," Marcus began as he addressed the 12-member board. "Within 2 years of aging out of foster care, 40% of young adults have experienced homelessness, 60% of young women have given birth, and only 20% have gained meaningful employment. But our research shows that relatively modest support during the transition period can dramatically improve these outcomes." Marcus had spent weeks developing the proposal, working with Sarah and the Foundation's research team to design a comprehensive program that would address the specific challenges he remembered from his own experience. The program would provide temporary housing assistance, job placement services, educational support, and most importantly, ongoing mentorship from successful adults who had navigated similar challenges. "We're proposing to start with a pilot program in 3 cities, Chicago, Denver, and Atlanta," Marcus continued. 25 participants in each location, with a total investment of $1.2 million over 3 years. Based on similar programs in other states, we project that 80% of participants will achieve stable housing and employment within 2 years. Board member Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired university president, raised her hand with a question. "Marcus, what makes you confident this program will succeed where others have struggled?" "Personal experience," Marcus replied honestly. "I aged out of the foster system myself, and I know how isolating and overwhelming that transition can be. But more importantly, I understand what works. Consistent support, practical assistance with immediate needs, and most crucially, someone who believes in your potential even when you don't believe in it yourself." The board voted unanimously to approve the pilot program, but the most meaningful moment came after the meeting when Robert and Eleanor pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. "We couldn't be prouder of what you've accomplished in just 6 months," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've brought fresh perspective and genuine passion to this work." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "But more than that, you've maintained the personal touch that has always been central to our approach. Reading your interview notes and follow-up reports, it's clear that you truly care about each individual we help." They shared updates about their life in Denver, including news that they had decided to establish a small satellite office there to better serve the Rocky Mountain region. They had also been approached by several other wealthy families interested in replicating the Foundation's model in other parts of the country. "You've become something of a celebrity in philanthropic circles," Eleanor said with a smile. 3 universities have requested that you speak at their social work graduate programs, and the National Association of Philanthropic Organizations wants you to present at their annual conference. The recognition was gratifying, but Marcus found his greatest satisfaction in the daily work of identifying and helping people whose circumstances touched his heart. Every successful intervention reminded him of the crucial assistance he had received during his own difficult moments, and every life changed for the better felt like a validation of the Whitman's faith in his character. That evening, Marcus met Emma for dinner at a restaurant near Northwestern's campus. His sister had flourished in her new environment, excelling academically while also becoming involved in student organizations focused on healthcare advocacy. The financial security provided by Marcus's position had allowed her to fully immerse herself in her studies and extracurricular activities without the constant worry about money that had previously dominated her thoughts. "I got my MCAT scores back today," Emma announced as soon as Marcus sat down. "I scored in the 95th percentile." Marcus felt a surge of pride and relief. Emma's scores virtually guaranteed her acceptance to medical school, fulfilling the dream they had both worked toward for years. But more than that, her success represented the broader impact of the Foundation's work. When you help one person achieve their potential, the ripple effects can last for generations. "I've been thinking about specializing in pediatric emergency medicine," Emma continued, "working with kids who are in crisis situations, especially those from difficult family backgrounds. I want to be the kind of doctor who understands what those children are going through beyond just their medical needs." Emma's career choice reflected her own experiences growing up in challenging circumstances, but also demonstrated how receiving support and opportunity could inspire people to help others facing similar struggles. It was exactly the kind of long-term impact the Foundation hoped to achieve with every intervention. As they talked through dinner, Emma shared her plans for the summer break. Rather than taking a typical vacation, she had arranged to volunteer with a medical mission organization, providing health care in underserved communities abroad. The experience would complement her medical school applications while allowing her to gain perspective on healthcare challenges in different cultural contexts. "I keep thinking about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't happened to make that delivery during the snowstorm," Emma said. "It's like everything changed because you chose to be kind to strangers." Marcus had reflected on the same thought many times over the past months. The chain of events that had led to his current position could easily have unfolded differently if he had made even slightly different choices that snowy evening. If he had simply delivered the prescription and left. If he had been too tired or rushed to notice the Whitman's situation. If he had chosen efficiency over compassion. "I don't think it was just about that one night," Marcus replied. "I think Robert and Eleanor saw something in how I approached my work every day. The snowstorm just gave them a chance to see it up close." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone buzzing with an urgent text from Sarah Chen. A family in Milwaukee had contacted the Foundation's emergency hotline after their house had been destroyed in a fire. The parents were both teachers. They had 3 young children, and their insurance coverage was inadequate to replace their belongings and secure temporary housing while their home was rebuilt. "I have to handle this," Marcus told Emma, already mentally shifting into crisis response mode. "Emergency situations take priority over everything else." Emma smiled with understanding. "Go save the day, big brother. That's what you do now." The drive back to the Foundation offices took 20 minutes, during which Marcus coordinated with Sarah and the emergency response team via hands-free phone calls. By the time he arrived at the building, they had already verified the family's circumstances, confirmed their immediate needs, and prepared an assistance package that would provide temporary housing, replacement clothing, and personal items and funds to help them maintain stability while insurance claims were processed. "The family can pick up an emergency check tomorrow morning," Sarah reported as Marcus reviewed the documentation. "We've also arranged for a local partner organization to help them navigate the insurance process and connect with contractors for rebuilding." Cases like this reminded Marcus why the Foundation's emergency response capability was so crucial. While long-term programs like scholarships and business loans addressed ongoing challenges, immediate crises required rapid intervention that could make the difference between temporary setback and permanent disaster. As Marcus prepared to leave the office that night, he paused to look at the wall of photographs in the Foundation's main hallway. Hundreds of pictures showed scholarship recipients at graduation ceremonies, families in their new homes, small business owners at ribbon-cutting celebrations, and individuals whose lives had been transformed through the Foundation's intervention. Each photograph represented someone who had been given a chance to build a better future, but more importantly, each represented someone who would likely help others in turn. The Foundation's research showed that over 60% of assistance recipients eventually became donors to charitable causes themselves, creating a multiplying effect that extended the impact far beyond the original investment. Marcus's own photograph would soon join the wall, not as a recipient, but as someone whose life had been changed by encountering the Foundation's work. The picture would show him at his desk, reviewing applications and making decisions that would affect hundreds of lives, but it would also capture the moment when a delivery driver's act of kindness had evolved into a career dedicated to systematic compassion. As he locked his office and headed home to his lakefront apartment, Marcus reflected on how completely his life had been transformed. 6 months earlier, his biggest concern had been whether he could afford Emma's textbooks for the coming semester. Now he was responsible for distributing millions of dollars annually to people whose circumstances reminded him of his own journey from uncertainty to security. The work was challenging and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also deeply fulfilling in ways he had never experienced before. Every day brought new opportunities to make a difference in someone's life, and every successful intervention reminded him that kindness, when supported by adequate resources and systematic thinking, could create changes that lasted for generations. Marcus's phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this time from Robert Whitman. Saw the news about the Milwaukee family. Well handled. Eleanor and I are proud to see our foundation in such capable hands. Your grandmother would be proud too. The D reference to Mrs. Rodriguez brought tears to Marcus's eyes. She had always believed that his difficult childhood would eventually become the foundation for helping others, though she could never have imagined the scope of the opportunity that would eventually present itself. As Marcus fell asleep that night in his comfortable Chicago apartment, he thought about the delivery routes he used to drive through Denver's neighborhoods, never suspecting that one snowy evening would change everything. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, and new opportunities to transform lives through strategic compassion. But tonight, he was simply grateful for the reminder that extraordinary opportunities could emerge from ordinary acts of kindness, and that sometimes the most important journeys begin with nothing more than choosing to help a stranger in need. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.